Welcome back for another episode. Today I have a special guest, brother Kumer, is with us from Australia. Kumer, welcome.
Yes, Kwar, thank you so much. I appreciate you for bringing me on board. It's a pleasure to meet you once again. And I thank you also for reaching out to me to be able to have this excellent segment that we can discuss, learn, elevate, and pretty much interact with one another from different parts of the world.
Absolutely. And right now you're in Australia, correct?
Yes, that's right. I'm here in Australia, Melbourne, Australia, one of the largest cities in Australia. And I'm quite happy to be here. I've been to the US a few times. I think I can share some of my experiences that I've had in the US, maybe along down the track or maybe some other time. But yeah, I've been living here for the past 18 years or so.
Perfect. So I know you're as an African, you're not originally from Australia. So tell me a little bit about where you're originally from and how your childhood was and transitioning from your birth country on the continent to where you are now in Australia.
Absolutely. I was born in Kenya, a place called Rift Valley, Turkana region. And to be more specific, I grew up in a refugee camp known as Kakuma refugee camp. I was born there. I grew up there. I spent 10 years also there, living there. And then from there in 2005, that's when I had the transition with my family to travel on a refugee, what you call visa, humanitarian visa, all the way to Australia in 2005. And it was in July the 23rd that we first arrived to Australia. So that's just a brief background of where I lived, where I was born, where I grew up. My background in terms of nationality, even though we as Africans, we are all one people, but just a different expression of different cultures, languages, and events, I guess. I come from the current country known as South Sudan, which is in the East Africa region. So that is where originally my parents are from. However, due to the SPLM war that erupted in South Sudan, then called Sudan, my parents immigrated to Kenya, and that's where I was born because they fled the civil war. And then from there, we migrated to Australia. My childhood predominantly was also spent, and up to now, I've spent the past 18 years here in Australia. I think it's fair enough for us to say that I will get more detailed going forward as far as how my life was and what has been happening ever since. Yeah, that's how life has been for me.
Excellent. I appreciate it. Do you consider yourself to be a Pan-Africanist, and what from your knowledge and experience with life has brought you to that conclusion?
Yeah, sure. No, I appreciate the question. The question is quite very we can take a different approach to the question, I guess. I wouldn't consider myself Pan-Africanist in the sense of its origin and the way it was formulated and how it came to be so. But I would say in terms of its values and in terms of its intended nature and what Pan-Africanism intends to achieve, I would say yes, I do agree predominantly with its vision and how it came to be. But I wouldn't per se call myself a Pan-Africanist as an individual. But I would say who I am in regards to the African vision or mission per se. I would say that I'm someone who is African-centered, rather. And what I mean by African-centered is someone who everything is centered on the African revolutionary cause. And I mean that in the literal sense. So my plight and my cause is for the deliverance of my people, both in word and in deed, from the imperialist systems of the world, which is led by the dominant colonial systems, which is basically Western powers who colonized our people, the African continent per se, and they have been ever since for the last 400 years plus. And to be more specific, for the past 2,000 years plus, as far as Kemetic history, culture, and knowledge is concerned. So that's just a way I would describe myself.
All right. I appreciate that, and I definitely understand. You know, we all have our perspectives on things, and it's important how we contextualize things to convey an understanding, and have some kind of a balance in thought, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah, I wouldn't say you should adhere to one ideology or the other, as long as we can find some kind of consistency and cohesion in thought. And with that said, how important to you is forming relationships with other Black African people around the world, particularly in the diaspora and in the US? How important do you think it is to form these types of relationships?
I think it's quite very important to not just establish relationships that are worthwhile in terms of social relationships, but I think it is important for us to establish what I would consider revolutionary networks by which we establish relationships that are based on revolutionary causes. What do I mean by that is we have and we should always strive to deliver our people from the shackles, not only of slavery per se in the context of modern slavery, but we must establish relationships that have the same agenda. Too many people in this day and age have relationships that are not based on anything. And one example that I can give you to be much more clearer is the relationship that I have with you. We are in a messenger group that is called African Scientific Research for Liberation. That is what we called it, or I ended up naming the group that anyways. But our relationship was stemmed from the fact that we had a common ground. And we have so many African brothers and sisters who have relationships, but their relationships does not bear fruits. We want relationships that bear fruits. Fruits of what kind? We want fruits that advance the African resonance agenda, that advance the liberation agenda, that advance the unity agenda, that advance, relationships that actually build families, that build communities, that build our societies to be African-centered in terms of its indigenous systems, in the way we do our things. For example, Africa is not the only continent that basically is communal in nature, although we were the first to be. Asiatic communities are communal in nature. Middle Eastern communities are communal in nature. South American communities are communal in nature. But that is one aspect that Africa has maintained in the diaspora, and that is something that I appreciate much. And for example, I still maintain my relationship with my community, although most of them are not driven per se in the same way that I am driven as far as African agendas are concerned. And when I say African agendas, I just mean pretty much, the ideology, the things that we have in common, and the things that we pretty much strive to have and see Africa be as a continent. So when I attend these programs, these communal programs, I attend it with a purpose, not just for the sake of going and having a nice barbecue, a nice meal, but I attended with dropping seeds, not only of knowledge, but dropping seeds of liberation, of liberating our people, not just through their thought, but actually returning them back to the roots, returning them back to the roots of Africanness. What does it mean to be African? So this is why I think not only building, but sustaining, functional relationships that could be of help to each and everybody in the community is very, very important. And I think also because we live in the Western world and it tends to be very individualistic, it is very hard for people to be communalistic. It's very hard for people to be together all the time, thinking back about their ancestral history, discussing their oral history, discussing their great histories that their communities hold and their communities have brought. My friend said. And to hear. So that's how I would explain it much.
I appreciate that. Lead me to ask a question. Just from your experience, and be as honest as you can. I want you to to give your feedback with no reservation.
Mhm.
Do you believe that African people born in the West, particularly in the US, and even in Australia, I know you have Black people, African people who are born there who may not have ever experienced life in any country on the continent. Do you feel like oftentimes we're a little, for lack of words, we're a little confused or misguided in our understanding of the nature of struggle on the continent?
Mhm. Yeah, that's a very good question to ask, and the reason being is because even I myself, having traveled to the motherland, to our homeland, the African continent, several times actually. I think I have traveled back ever since I've come here, around maybe 4 times, if I may be clear. The first time I went in 2013, the second time in 2015, the third time in 2017, and the last time I went was just last year. The African population in the West, predominantly, countries like the UK, Australia, and America, to my honest opinion, based on the interactions I've had, they have a very distorted view, or what I would consider a warped view of life in Africa in general. The reason being is because, one, media powerhouses have literally obliterated or destroyed their image of how they should see or view Africa. What do I mean? When they think of Africa in general, they just assume it's just a vast land that is possibly jungled, animals running around, and people running around naked, and there is absolutely nothing there. But when you go back home, despite all those views and opinions that people have of Africa, you'll be surprised that when you actually go there, boots on the ground, it's a whole different world. I just recently came from Kenya last year, and I kid you not, I'm not even exaggerating. Not, of course, I won't say the whole entire Kenya is developed, but I will tell you, Nairobi, the capital city, is far developed than some cities in the West. 150%.
Wow.
And that is just on an infrastructure basis. Now, when we talk about social relations, which is basically, the interactiveness of the people, everyone in Africa or in Kenya in general, based on my experience, everybody is super friendly. When I tell you everyone is super friendly, I mean it from the bottom of my heart. You will find even people who are poor interacting with you on the streets or even in the shop. Everything is just so vibrant that you really, really feel like there is life in this place. Whereby in the West, there is human beings, but they're not living. You go to work, you pay your bills, you come home, you're depressed, nobody knows what's going on. You don't even know the name of your neighbor. But in Africa, everyone knows everyone. Everyone knows each other. Everybody knows who's the next door neighbor. Everybody knows who's the shopkeeper. Everybody knows who's the bus driver. Everybody knows which kids are whose kids, etc., etc. So I was also like that. I'm not going to lie to you. Before I went back to the motherland in 2013, man, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be walking everywhere and everything is going to be dusty and blah, 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 blah. But when I traveled back, man, it was one of the most beautiful experiences I've ever had. Now, I've had opportunity to travel to the US twice. I've been to Asia, I've been to Europe, and a few other places in Africa. Nothing beats Africa when it comes to not just holiday destination, but a place to live, a place to retire, a place to pretty much say, look, I'm going to come and invest whatever knowledge I have, whether it is through your career, whether it is through your liberation struggle as an African individual or group, and so forth. The only problem that Africans face back home is basically the lack of expertise that may be in the West, that we are using our knowledge to basically serve the interests of the West. Instead of taking those knowledge, taking those expertise and taking it back home and saying, look, we don't mind volunteering, we don't mind being paid whatever minimum wage we get paid, but it's called nation building for a reason. You build your nation knowing that the next generation will enjoy the fruits of your labor.
Absolutely.
So that is what I can say based on my experience, and that is just total honesty.
Absolutely. Well, I appreciate that a great deal. And I definitely agree with every aspect of every level of what you're saying. And that's why I feel like it was so important to have this conversation.
Absolutely.
You know, you mentioned being boots on the ground. One thing that as you know, like I told you, I'm not trying to be some YouTube celebrity or anything. I want to make real relationships with real Africans and uh, do the unity work that is essential to us redefining who we are and developing ourselves so that we can be a benefit to our brothers and sisters on the continent, because that is the ultimate goal in my vision.
That's
Um,
right.
I'm not so much concerned anymore with what's happening in the US or anywhere else in the world. I'm slowly learning to develop all of my ideas toward what, you know, not just myself can do toward other African development, or, you know, on the continent, but what am I going to give to my children so that they can continue, and they'll see that, you know, and I'm sure you do the same. The
That's right.
children can see what we're doing. They see the relationships that we're forming, even if it's online. They see the
That's right.
importance of us building relationships together and having a vision to unite ourselves and our efforts toward the African continent. Um, I know in the past we spoke about, you know, our different ideas, our different visions for the continent. When you think of Africa, where does your heart lie the most and why?
Sure. That's a very, very powerful question indeed. And I think I would start off to answer the question as this: regardless of what, regardless of where you come from in Africa, regardless of what vision you have in Africa, what matters the most, as long as it fulfills or it supports the African agenda, the African liberation struggle, whether it is by community work, whether it is by a re-Africanization of the nation states that we so-called believe and hope that they are part of, a progressive system. I think it's very important for us to acknowledge the fact that regardless of the visions that we individually have, as long as it is pushing towards the collective good or the greater good of the African continent overall, I think we should not, first of all, undermine them. Secondly, we should always use our complementary efforts to be able to complement each other's work. So that's one thing I would like to say before I go forward and explain what I believe. Yeah, so that's one thing I would say before I go forward. Now, as far as my vision and what are my plans and where I feel uh, I would be spearheading or doing a lot of my works is basically where my home is for me. And where home is for me basically is in South Sudan. I do have a few things that I actually want to work on. One is the liberation struggle through education. I have a passion for education.
Mm.
And when I mean education, I'm not talking about just some bunch of schools that are put together to be able to teach people how to read and write, but is putting in place educational systems through physical infrastructure and also intellectual infrastructure to be able to teach our children what nation building is all about.
Mm.
A lot of our African curriculum has been designed in such a way that it serves the puppet masters. And what I mean by puppet masters are individuals who are puppets, but we consider them to be masters, aka our governments. And I'm not saying all our governments are evil and they are part of the agenda. No. All I'm saying is that with the African resources, African intellectual geniuses, African intellectual capacity and functionality in nature, we should be ruling the world as we did in the past. And when I mean by ruling the world, I don't mean going around, with guns and boats and pillaging people. No, I mean in the literal sense, in the sciences, technology, engineering, and so forth. But my passion for education is so strong that I believe in order for us to catch up with the rest of the world, Our liberation must start from education. And we have such a distorted view of liberation that every time the word liberation or revolutionary or revolution comes out, all we think about is guns, tanks, and some ammo, and basically all things military. But when you look at some of the most successful, some of the most fascinating revolutionary movements throughout all civilizations, and in this case, African civilizations, is basically liberation struggles that have been started, established, and informed by education. And I mean education in the real sense, enlightening people or giving knowledge to people to be able to practically apply them. We have a lot of people who are very militant, but when you tell them, can you organize an army? Can you organize anything of worth organizing? They won't know how to do it. Okay? They won't have a clue how to do it, which is a very big problem. And the other problem that we also face as Africans, it's not that we lack, but we don't want to study things for us to be able to correct them. If we want to have the next generation of African leaders be, quote unquote, Pan-Africanist in nature, or push the African agenda, liberation agenda or liberation struggle, we must start teaching them the right education. And what kind of education are we talking about? Education that liberates the mind, liberates the spirit, and liberates the body. Because no matter how much we teach our children, if they're not liberated in their mind, they will forever be black boys or black girls or black men or black women in black bodies, but having white minds.
Mm.
And that is a plague. That is a literal plague that is plaguing most African entire communities or entire nations.
Absolutely.
Our judicial systems are Western. Our army are designed that in such a way that it is Roman in nature. Our legislative system is Western. Our governmental system is Western. Our parliamentary system is Western. Even the infrastructure in which we create and we design our world around is Western. What happened to the African designs? What happened to the African infrastructure? Did we not have an infrastructure before? Yes, we did. When you look at Kemet in nature, it has one of the most, it has one of the most complex physical infrastructures the world have ever seen. Why can't we take that which was before and amalgamate it into current designs of African cities, African communities, African cultures? And it is because we don't have the self-esteem and the confidence in ourselves to be able to do such things, because we assume by doing those very things, we will be put to shame, or it is something that is to be embarrassed or ashamed of. I'll give you a very clear example, Kwa. When I came here, I did my primary school, my secondary, and my university here. Now, I remember when my mom made me my African food and I took it to school, right? I took it to primary school, and I even took it to high school. There's this soup that is made out of okra. And then the food that you eat with it is made out of flour, maize flour.
Mm.
It is known as semolina for the ladies who know it better than myself. Now, when I was eating that thing was so good. But when I was eating it at school, guess what? My friends were laughing at me. They said, "Oh, ew, this thing looked like mucus," because it was very slimy. They started mocking me and saying, "Oh, it looks like mucus, it looks like shit," and all these things. And my sister, for the lack of, probably self-esteem at that point in time, she walked away from me and didn't want to eat with me anymore, because we're twins. So we usually share our food. Deep down in my heart, I felt embarrassed, but I said, well, why are they putting me to shame for eating something that is of African nature? And later on, of course, over the years and the decades now, everybody knows that okra is one of the superfoods.
Yes.
And it is a favorite in East Africa and throughout Africa in general. But we were mocked for it.
Mm.
So when we have the confidence, even in foreign countries, we should be able to represent not only the clothes that are African, but even the food that are African.
Absolutely.
Because I always say this, and this is something that I like to say that is of my favorite. The creation of this world is not mistaken to put every creation or every kingdom, animal kingdom, in its habitat. Africans were put in Africa. Asians were put in Asia. Europeans were put in Europeans. So in essence, even the foods that we eat are chemically programmed for us. That is why even our skin color, as black, as jet black as we are, it's programmed for the heat that Africa deals with. And you may know very well, Kwa, that South Sudanese are one of the darkest, if not probably one of the darkest in the continent in terms of what you consider skin pigmentation or melanin per se. But some people are afraid of their skin color, that they go and bleach it. They go and change their color. They go and do whatever they want to do to feel superior. But in reality, it's inferiority complex. They feel inferior, and they feel that they need to look different and feel different. And I tell you the truth of the matter. Most of the Western countries are not programmed for us, even in terms of its habitat, in terms of its actual nature, in terms of its actual food. It's not programmed for us. Now, I'm not saying that we can't live here in the diaspora, but I'm just saying that our natural habitat, where we feel much more happier, where we feel more alive, where we feel more rejuvenated, is the African habitat.
Absolutely.
And we need to pack our shit. Excuse me for the language.
No, go ahead, brother.
Do what you gotta do. Get the knowledge that you can get the expertise you can get, and go back home and build your home. Absolutely. Because nobody else is going to build it for you. And guess what? We already know what's happening in Africa. We had the waves of the Asiatics. We had the waves of the Europeans. We had the waves of the Arabs. And now we have the waves, of course, of the Asians, again, the Chinese.
Yes.
They're back. And they're controlling every part of our countries. And we all know that. And we let our leaders slide through and pretend like nothing is happening. But when we liberate our children through education, teaching them African history, teaching them Kemetic history, teaching them not only Kemetic history, but other ancient history of African civilizations. There are different civilizations, not only Kemet. Kemet is just the pinnacle of it, but there were some as golden, if not as glorious as Kemet. But we seldomly not talk about it. So that's just to answer your question. I know I've really exhausted that question, but I wanted us to be on the same page. So I think for me, East Africa is home, South Sudan specifically. One area that I would like to really focus on is basically education. And I mean education in the African sense, African curriculum. And I think one individual that I can make a shout out to, Brother Taka, or Baba Taka, Dr. Taka, Kilimanjaro, he wrote a book on how to, that dives much more in detail in regards to what I'm just talking about. And I think his coursework and his books can really help in establishing, right from kindergarten all the way to university, PhD level, how do you establish African-centered, educational systems or universities, primary schools, secondary schools, etc. And I think he has great resources because he's done those things. So we can learn a bit from him, or a lot from him actually. Man, so education is something I would focus on. The rest will fall on top of that. But I think when I lay the foundation as education, even if I don't achieve my goals, or even if I don't achieve the visions and the missions that I've stated to you privately, guess what? Those children are going to carry them out anyways, because they've been educated in the African, in the African nature and in their African essence. You get what I mean?
I do, man. I unfortunately have to wrap things up here, but I really appreciate you and the way you laid things out. African education for liberation.
That's what's up,
man. You laid things out so beautifully and so powerfully. I could hear the passion in the tone in your voice, and I'm sure that when people listen to this, they will receive the same energy. So, Kumer, I just want to say thank you for taking this meeting at very short notice. I know I kind of sprang it up on you. I appreciate your willingness. I'm thankful for our relationship. We met online, studying some of the work of the University of Kemet Press and others as well.
And the University of Timbuktu.
Yes. Good brother Mbekissie. Give brother Mbekissie a shout out as well.
Shout out to him as well. He's done a great job.
Absolutely. So we'll do this again, for sure. And
Absolutely.
I just want to wish the
And
best to
and
you.
and, may, and maybe sometime in the near future we could interview you as well instead of just you interviewing us.
We'll get to it. I want to make sure that we foster this relationship, and that this is a piece of the work that we do.
Absolutely.
This is a piece of the unity, a piece of the Pan-African work, a piece of the collective communal work. Even
That's
though
right.
we're not out in the streets, or in our communities,
Yep.
I feel like I have a brother in you, so we're doing what
I
we're
appreciate
supposed to do.
No, like I said before I wrap it up as well. Like I said earlier on when you asked the question, I think it was a very powerful question. And to summarize what you said, what is the vision that you have, or what place do you want to go and work in the Africa? I think Africa is so broad. No one single person can actually fulfill the role that Africa needs it to fulfill. But on a collective note, we can actually do it, and we do it through all means. And I think our brother Malcolm, the great late Malcolm X, says it very clear, by all means necessary. So, everybody got a part to play. And I think it's good that we complement one another. I think we've spoken in detail about what I really want to do. And you've shared your heart also to me. And I think I will help you where I can help you. And I mean, you can also help me where you feel necessary you can. And that's just what brotherhood is all about,
That's
reaching
it.
out and lifting each other out of the pits that we are in. And I think we do it better. No, nobody's gonna do it for us. That's one thing I can tell you. No, every community has learned what brotherhood is, except for the African community. And I think it's about time we catch up. We get rid of the strife. We get rid of the backbiting. We get rid of the shallow nonsense. We get rid of all those things, and we start putting work and calling out ourselves and being accountable. And I think that's very important. Even when you asked me to come on the show, I said, yeah, I would. And we had some difficulties, but I had to make it because it was not just something that was important, but I believe that it would resonate with someone out there, So
Absolutely.
that's what I would say. And I appreciate you for also inviting me and giving me this opportunity to share my experience, man.
Absolutely, Kumer. Thank you again, and we'll do this again sometime soon. Best to
Excellent.
you and your family, and continue with your journey. And I wish you
No
the
problem.
best. All right, brother.
Put me in touch. All right. Thank you.